Gentlemen, please allow me to introduce myself. I'm Francis Finlay, co-chairman with Ross Perot Jr. of the Board of Directors of the East-West Institute. On behalf of the Institute, it gives me very great pleasure to introduce one of India's leading civil servants, Chandrasheker, chairman of the Indian Telecommunications Commission and secretary of the Department of Telecommunications. He's also secretary for the Department of Information Technology and a member of the board of the National E-Governance Advisory Group of India. The Secretary has very kindly agreed to stand in at the last moment for his Minister, the Honourable Kapil Sibal, who has been asked by the Prime Minister of India to remain in the country to address a domestic political matter which arose over the weekend. The Secretary has made a special trip at the request of his Minister to be with us today, for which we're extremely grateful. The purpose that brings us all here today, international collaboration for improved cybersecurity, is close to your heart, Mr. Secretary, and to your responsibilities. Just last week, I understand you met with the United States Secretary for Homeland Security, Janet Napolitano, to discuss bilateral steps in this area of policy. Your government is a leader in setting cybersecurity policy, and its robust legislation has placed it in the vanguard as a force for change, challenging some of the assumptions in the legal systems of other countries. We know that you have introduced legislative changes that many in other countries admire. The Data Security Council of India and India's Computer Emergency Response Team are also recognized globally as leaders in the field. The East-West Institute is honored to have been working with Indian organizations since the first days of our worldwide cybersecurity initiative. These include NASSCOM, the leading organization of Indian software manufacturers, and the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry, which just 2 months ago hosted a best practice workshop in Delhi for the Institute in one of our flagship cybersecurity efforts, Raguchi, the reliability of global undersea cable communications infrastructure. Ladies and gentlemen, our guest today brings a unique perspective and vast experience to enlighten our discussions. Chandrasheker established the first Department of Information Technology in India in the state of Andhra Pradesh. Before his role as chairman from 1996 as the chairman and managing director of the State Industrial Infrastructure Corporation, and from 1997 as chief managing director, Andhra Pradesh Industrial Infrastructure Corporation, he masterminded the conceptualization, planning, and implementation of various key initiatives in the state in the field of information technology. The framework that evolved was widely regarded as path-breaking and catapulted the state to the forefront of IT developments in the country. It became a role model for most other states, which sent several teams to study the experience and emulated the ideas and concepts pioneered in the state. The unique program that was evolved powered the IT revolution in the state, attracted global attention, and was widely covered in the national and international media. The comprehensive program drawn up included creation of requisite infrastructure, high-tech city, strategic human resources development initiatives, the Indian Institute of Information Technology, and a comprehensive policy framework for the adoption of IT and governance. He has a deep understanding of the issues and problems related to IT implementations in government, and experience in finding innovative solutions to such problems in field conditions. He has abundant experience in dealing with working alongside highly reputed international consultants on major IT projects, and since 2002 has been the Secretary of the Information Technology Department in India, adding to his portfolio the Secretary of the Telecommunications sector last year. It attests to his deep understanding and knowledge of information technology that he can carry these two briefs at the same time. Mr. Secretary, we're privileged today to have the opportunity of learning from your deep and unique experiences in this complex field.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, at the outset, let me convey the apologies of the Minister who, as Mr. Finlay mentioned, couldn't make it at the last moment due to some developments. But I regard it as my privilege and good fortune to have been here and to be a part of what I regard as a very important event here today. I was listening to the interventions by the panelists in the previous session, and the number of suggestions with regard to various operational and tactical measures that could and ought to be taken by companies to ensure cybersecurity. But we also heard the view that beyond a point, there was not too much that a company could do at its own level, and some interventions were required within the whole sector, and maybe in some cases beyond that as well. That might sound a little bit like buck passing, but actually it sets the stage, in fact, for what I thought I should share with you. And the other interesting thing that came out was the dilemmas and contradictions that had to be addressed. The contradiction between the goal of the CEO to save money for the company and the CTO or the CISO to actually spend money to make the company secure. And I think there are several such dilemmas and contradictions as we address the questions of cybersecurity. But before I come to that, I would certainly like to refresh what several speakers have said, that today technology permeates almost every aspect of our lives. And it's not just about communicating with each other, it's not just about social sector media. It's about the way business is done, the way commerce is carried out, the way financial transactions take place. And in a lot of countries, especially developing countries like India, even social sector services like education, health, not just information about these services, but the very services themselves are actually using the medium of the internet. So it has indeed become a pathway for people to develop and grow economically. It's become a channel for financial inclusion as well. Critical infrastructure, the entire telecommunication infrastructure, power infrastructure, communication, railways, airports, roads, all of these infrastructures are now increasingly getting digitized and critically dependent on the internet. The advent of digitalization and migration has brought huge opportunities for countries to leapfrog in terms of development. At the same time, it's not just the opportunities, but the threats which have also grown. And I just saw some interesting illustrations of whether the threats are growing faster or the opportunities are growing faster. And it seems to be a race, really, between the two. But given the whole direction of growth and the advent of different technologies, whether we talk about cloud computing or the advent of convergence with cable, TV, internet, mobile telephony, all of these converging, the fact is that the threats today can be triggered from one location in any country. It can pass through several other countries. It can perform certain actions in yet another country. And that action in turn can have impact in a third country after passing through several other countries. Dealing with these threats and dealing with them effectively, given the given everything that's at stake, is no longer a trivial issue, and one that governments increasingly feel compelled to address. The key question is in cybersecurity, the two terms, cyber and security. Cyber is to a significant extent dominated by the private sector. The underlying technologies, the way the internet grows, the users, and users are all outside the government. But security has been quintessentially a governmental function, a sovereign function. And that is where, when we come to cybersecurity, there are again a number of dilemmas which need to be addressed. The scale, for one, is something which is extremely difficult for private sector alone to address. I was looking at a statistic the other day which said that by 2015, it is expected that as many as 50 billion devices would be connected to the net, which means that it's not only people. There are going to be at least, on the average, around 10 devices per every person on the planet which are connected to the internet. So there are a lot of things which get controlled through the internet, and the kind of threats that we see can therefore have huge harmful effects if these threats are not addressed. These threats, in fact, emanate from either lone individuals or small groups, criminal gangs. Increasingly, we find association with terrorism, either being used for terrorist purposes or being the medium for a terrorist attack. And in perhaps a more unsettling development, in some cases the involvement of nation states, either acting on their own or in concert with non-state players. All of this has made the challenge extremely difficult and challenging. I don't need to go too much into the kind of threats and the nature of the kind of threats, whether it is worms or Trojans or the kind of attacks that we saw with the Stuxnet, which actually modified the programmable logic controllers, controlling very key and vital installations. These are definitely indicators of the kind of havoc that can be wrought. It can be very simple instances of the type that we heard of phishing or people stealing passwords, sometimes at an individual level, sometimes on a large scale by promising the moon. But a lot of these happen because of simple human gullibility. But not all of them are as simple as that. And some of them, in fact, pose extremely serious threat to critical infrastructure. As the technology has advanced and we've moved to more and more information moving and requiring larger and larger bandwidths through the optical fiber networks that crisscross the whole globe, there are a number of countries which have landing points for international cables, which carry huge quantities of information. India itself has submarine cable systems like CMEV 2, 3, and 4, SAFE, Falcon, Flag, I2I, and so on. And all of the major internet and telecom service providers in the country are connected to overseas telecommunication systems through international gateways. All the terabytes of information flowing through these cables are critically dependent on the safety and security of these cables, and disruptions have occurred in the past, either on account of accidents like the movement of ships or natural disasters. So that perhaps is on a very large scale the kind of damage that can be caused, maybe even by benign acts. But let me come to the kind of dilemmas that we face in dealing with the nature of the cybersecurity threat today. First and foremost, the nature of cyberspace. It is borderless and anonymous. Whereas across the country, across the world, countries are organized on a territorial basis, and governments, countries, and laws are all linked to territory. So there's a fundamental and inherent contradiction between the nature of cyberspace and the nature of the manner in which governance and regulation is carried out the world over. If you look at again, in the cyberspace, I mentioned about security being a quintessentially government function. And in cyberspace, users being largely outside the government and the private sector playing a very major role. The inherent indivisibility of cyberspace at one level makes it a global problem, perhaps even more so than the environment, because given the kind of threats and given the nature in which it works, a threat could manifest itself across the whole world or across a whole country. And we have seen examples of that in the last few years. So clearly, it's not possible for a country or a company acting alone to deal with these threats. And it's now, I think, accepted wisdom that it does require concerted action across governments and across the private sector. But if you were to ask the question, what kind of actions and what kind of coordination, that's where the answers become a little more tricky. And that is really the need, that is why the need arises to really think through some of these issues, because the finding solutions to a very limited part of the problem is a little bit like the story of the guy who saw his friend searching for something under a lamppost. So he said, "What are you searching for?" He said, "I'm searching for my key." So he said, "How did you drop it here?" He said, "No, I didn't drop it here. I dropped it in the park nearby." So he said, "But why are you looking here?" He said, "Because this is where the light is, so I can look only here." So if you're trying to solve the problem only based on the solutions that you have available, then you would not really be able to address the heart of the problem if it lies somewhere else. And that's the essence of the issues in cybersecurity. The first dilemma, therefore, is how do we reconcile this borderless anonymity on one side and the kind of concerns that the government has in maintaining security. The second dilemma I had referred to about the concerns, the difference between the kind of concerns which the government and the private sector have. In the concern for security, governments look at questions like, how do I prevent the internet from being used for nefarious purposes? How do you ensure that it's not used for terrorism? How do you ensure that there is traceability? How do you ensure that there is interceptability in a lawful manner? And that is fundamentally contradictory to many of the characteristics of the internet as we see it today. Balancing between these two is a huge challenge. In India today, for example, we have a lot of debate currently on in the country about reconciling, on one side, right to information legislation and right to privacy. At some point of time, these two collide with each other. So the challenge today is really to find solutions and coordinated actions which resolve these dilemmas And to my mind, unless the agenda for coordinated action brings out very clearly what it is that governments look for in cybersecurity, what it is that the private sector looks for in cybersecurity, and what do individual users, the billions of people who use the internet, what do they look for? And the second is, what can they do? What is it which is within their power to actually address the issues of cybersecurity? And finally, what are the actions which need to be taken by each of them? Unless we are able to put these very precisely and in a manner that they are able to reinforce each other, then I'm afraid that individual actions by one or the other, or in a geographically segmented manner, would not really be able to address the problem in the long run. And I think that's why this forum becomes critically important in addressing some of these issues, and also in trying to find a balance between the different dilemmas that need to be resolved in addressing these problems. I would, however, like to mention that at the policy and the strategy level, there are some principles of a modern society which perhaps have a bearing on how these dilemmas are addressed, in terms of how open do we make it, how regulated do we allow it to be, how do you strike the balance between these two, and so on. And these are the aspect of democracy, which I think is a fundamental characteristic of the internet itself, free speech, where there is absolutely minimal regulation, and the rule of law. And ultimately, every solution, both in regulatory aspects and in the technology aspects, would need to perhaps have some assumptions and agree on certain basic principles with regard to some of these tenets of a modern society. Perhaps the issue is that even on these fundamentals, there is not necessarily complete agreement. And it's therefore, I think, important to put a core group together which actually represents major players in cyberspace, and who have some degree of commonality in terms of the stake, in terms of the set of assumptions while addressing issues of cybersecurity, and then try and evolve a concerted strategy to deal with these problems. One of the key challenges that we have seen is that capacity and capability is a huge issue. Awareness is a problem, but even if you are aware, then getting the right skills, both qualitatively and quantitatively, is a big challenge. And this is one area that we have identified in India, particularly given the kind of involvement that India has in the IT space. We do believe that we can contribute significantly to the ensuring cybersecurity and become a part of the world community in accordance with an agreed framework. I would, in conclusion, like to actually applaud the effort of the East-West Institute in trying to evolve a global action agenda for cybersecurity. We believe strongly that this is the right way. This requires concerted action by governments, by the private sector, and to a certain extent, it requires an understanding by civil society as well of the various imperatives and the need to balance between all these imperatives, and how one will have to make the right compromises if the benefits are not to be lost, and the threat from cybersecurity becomes a stumbling block to further growth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for that comprehensive overview and indeed your encouraging words for the initiative of the Institute.